Welcome to this special series of in-depth political interviews with Christian candidates standing in this year's general election from the major political parties that will take place on Thursday the 8th of June. And this interview today I'm joined by the Right Honourable Stephen Timms, representing the Labour Party. Stephen, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to interview you for the 2017 general election.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Pleasure. You are very much a Christian, very much a committed Christian. You have defended Christian values in the House of Commons, and now you are the faith envoy on behalf of the Labour Party, and you also chair the all-party parliamentary group on faith and society. Can you share with us what your Christian faith means to you and the impact that that's had in Parliament?
Well, I mean, like any Christian, it's what I believe as a Christian that really is the starting point for everything I think about and everything I do. So the reason I live today in East London was because when I was a student, I went to help out on a church mission one summer. Had a fantastic time for 2 weeks in the part of London I now represent as the MP. I've never been anywhere like that before. And when I left university, I wanted to live somewhere in London because I got a job in London. That was the only place I knew. So I went to stay there. I made some friends there. I shared a house with some people. And I also joined the Labour Party and joined the church, which by then they had planted. So my thinking about politics has always been very closely tied up with my faith because for me it was being obedient to how I was being called, which led to me ended up in East London in the first place and getting involved in the local politics and in the local community. And it's always been the starting point for my thinking. I'd pray every Sunday with people I met in the church. I'm doing that for 30 years now. And when I'm trying to think about what am I trying to achieve, what am I aiming for, what are the principles that I'm working from here, it's what I believe as a Christian that is always what I come back to.
Excellent. And Stephen, can you tell us why, as a young Christian, you decided to join the Labour Party?
Well, goodness me, this is going back a long way now. So I'm not from a Christian family. I became a Christian as a teenager, along with my brother, through going to a Crusaders Bible class. I think I was probably already a Labour supporter by that point, so that goes back before my Christian faith. But my thinking about both of them has always been very closely connected. And in the end, if Britain is going to be changed in the interests of less well-off people in Britain and indeed around the world, it's going to be the Labour Party that does it. That's the reason that I got heavily involved in the first place. That's still the view which I think stands up, which is been demonstrated by what's happened over the years in government and in opposition. And I think, therefore, serving God in politics, being obedient to the call of Jesus in politics, very naturally leads into commitment to the Labour Party.
Stephen, this year's general election has been labelled the Brexit election, and a number of your fellow members of Parliament in the Labour Party voted to remain. Why has Jeremy Corbyn, as leader, decided to endorse and support Brexit, almost to the extent of also wanting to trigger Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty?
Well, let me first of all make clear my own position on this. I, like almost all of my Labour colleagues, I campaigned to remain in the referendum. And when it came to the vote on Article 50 in the House of Commons, I voted against triggering Article 50. So I broke the Labour whip. I think it's the first time I've ever broken a three-line whip in Parliament. But I did on this occasion. I mean, Jeremy, I think, took the view, understandably, and a lot of my Labour colleagues did also, that the people had decided, and it was their obligation to vote in accordance with the referendum decision. In my case, in my constituency, in fact, voted to remain. I campaigned to remain. And I remain very concerned about the consequences of leaving the EU, so I felt the right thing to do was to vote against triggering Article 50. But I do understand why the party as a whole felt otherwise. Lots of my colleagues who campaigned for Remain nevertheless represent constituency where there was a big Leave majority. And I well understand why they felt that the right thing for them to do was to reflect the decision of their voters.
Now, there's been a lot of discussions, particularly within the Labour Party, whether they endorse what's known as a soft Brexit or they endorse a kind of strong Brexit. What is the Labour Party's position on kind of Brexit? And if Labour wins the next general election, how will they negotiate Britain's withdrawal from the European Union?
Well, our manifesto says that it's very important that we recognise the economic benefits that the UK enjoys as a result of membership of the single market and the customs union. And many of us feel that the right way for the UK outside the EU would be to stay in membership of those two things, as countries like Norway, Switzerland do at the moment. Now, Theresa May has made it pretty clear she's not wanting to do that. My fear, and I think the Labour fear, is that there would be very serious economic consequences if we simply left the whole thing. If, for example, in the future, if we want to buy something from somebody in Europe, we're going to have to pay import duties in order to do so. Equally, if we try and sell something in continental Europe, we have import duties on the things that we sell. Are we going to need visas to visit France or Spain in the future? All of these things, for me, in economic terms, are very troubling, and I would like us to retain the advantages, which freely acknowledged by ministers, of barrier-free access to the single market. Now, they say they think they will achieve barrier-free access to the single market through the negotiations over the next couple of years. I have to say, having spoken to members of parliaments elsewhere in Europe, I do not for one moment think they're going to achieve barrier-free access to the single market and no longer operating free movement of people, as they're determined not to do. So it's the economic consequences of that which are, for me, the big worry, and for the party also, and hence the commitment in our manifesto to recognise the benefits of membership of the single market and of the customs union.
Stephen, this general election has been very much characterised by the issue of leadership, maybe more so than in previous general elections. And your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has had to fight two leadership battles. First, to become leader of your party back in 2015 after the loss of the general election, and then also got challenged last year for the leadership of the party. Now, considering that he's struggling to win support from the Parliamentary Labour Party, what chances has he got of being Prime Minister to gain that support and trust from the British people?
Well, again, let me make my position clear. I voted for another candidate in both of the elections. I didn't vote for Jeremy in either of those elections. However, I have to say there has been an extraordinary growth in membership of our party in response to Jeremy's leadership. In my own constituency, party has more than doubled in membership. We're now the biggest political party anywhere in Europe. And the people who've joined seem to me to be exactly the kind of people that we always wanted to have in the Labour Party. And I'm absolutely sure whatever happens in this election and the months and years that follow, the fact that so many more people have joined the party is going to be a great source of future strength for Labour. And I think Jeremy is entitled to a great deal of credit for that success. He, I must say, gives me the impression he's enjoying himself during this election campaign. He feels like, he looks like a person who's comfortable, who knows what he stands for, knows what he wants to say, enjoys engaging with people. And let's see what happens when the election comes in a short period of time. The Labour Party manifesto, I must say, has been very well received in my constituency. It's interesting, I was talking to somebody the evening after it was published who said to me, the council tenant, she said to me when she heard Jeremy Corbyn talking about that manifesto, for the first time ever in her life, she thought to herself, there's a politician who understands. Jeremy's onto something here, and I think he's entitled to some credit for the way he's recognised some of the problems and expressed them in a way that makes a great deal of sense to a very large number of people.
Yeah. Talk about your manifesto. It very much describes how Jeremy Corbyn wants to. This is how the media portrayed it anyway, the mainstream media. That the Labour manifesto is a throwback to the 1970s, policies to renationalise UK water companies, the railways, the Royal Mail, and the national grid. I mean, how much would it cost the British taxpayer to actually have these companies back in public ownership again? And is that the right thing for the country?
Well, it depends. You see, nationalising the railways, actually, the way it's being proposed will not be a costly thing to do at all. It's been done when the East Coast Rail franchise collapsed. It was then operated in the public sector, and from everything I've seen, it actually was operated extremely successfully. It was a more popular service than the private service which had collapsed. So what the proposal is that we wait until the end of the franchise when it naturally expires, so there's no compensation to be paid to the franchise holder, and simply then start to run the service in the public sector subsequently. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of pounds being paid to rail operators at the moment. That money is being paid now. So simply keeping it in the public sector and operating the service is not a costly thing to do at all. I think, most people, when they see the Royal Mail, find it difficult to understand how the Royal Mail can not be in the public sector. I mean, we've got red letterboxes with the crown on. How can that be operated by a private company? It doesn't make a huge amount of sense, I don't think. So, I think the proposals that on public ownership in the manifesto actually make a lot of sense to a lot of people.
Would you also confront some of your critics who say that your election manifesto would bankrupt Britain and would give Britain a £250 billion debt? They also say that the tax burden would fall on high earners and also businesses, and would be the biggest tax burden since 1950, and would actually encourage many British businesses and the wealthy to actually leave the country, considering they're the wealth generators.
Well, it is true, we've been absolutely clear about this, that people who earn more than £80,000 a year will have to pay a bit more income tax. But anyone who has anything at all to do with the National Health Service knows how desperately it needs more funds. We're simply being honest about this and saying, yes, we do have to spend more on the National Health Service, and this is how we're going to get it. We're going to get it by increasing modestly the income tax for people earning more than £80,000 a year. Now, if someone else wants to come up with some other way of raising the money for the National Health Service, that's fine. What we can't do is carry on pretending that the National Health Service is in great shape. Whenever the Health Secretary talks about it, he says it's all fine, no problems. Well, anyone who's had anything to do, anyone who's even tried to book a GP appointment in the last year or so knows that things are not fine. We're being frank about that and saying, yes, there is a problem. We do need to invest more in the health service, and this is where it's going to come from. The Daily Mail you quoted from, I mean, it's a very long time since the Daily Mail has ever supported a Labour Party manifesto, so I'm not too surprised about that. But I think what the manifesto is saying actually makes a lot of sense to a lot of people.
And Stephen, when it comes down to one of the biggest issues affecting certainly our viewers, and this is a growing sense that over the last decade in particular, that many Christians feel politically and socially marginalised, and we're seeing that Christians going into their workplace now are fearful of praying for colleagues or praying for patients. They're fearful of wearing a cross. They're even fearful of even saying they're a Christian. What freedoms can your party ensure that Christian freedoms in this country, particularly in the workplace, are protected?
I would very much hope that people will, in the future, feel much more confident about these things. And I understand the anxiety that have been expressed. I mean, the issue about the wearing a cross in the workplace I thought was absurd. I think that's the British Airways case, and that should never, ever have been pursued. And I hope that we're not going to see things like that happening in the future. There is clear protection in law for religious minorities, for Christians and for others, and I want to see Christians increasingly confident about being able to talk about what they believe and why, and explain it to others. And actually, you know, as I was saying a little earlier, we are seeing more and more really valuable contributions to our communities coming from believers, food banks, projects to get people into work, looking after destitute asylum seekers, no end of things which weren't being done 15 or 20 years ago, today are being done by churches. And I think that does reflect a confidence, a very welcome confidence on the part of believers about their ability to contribute to shoulder responsibilities alongside others in our society. It's a unique contribution, it's an invaluable contribution. If we were to lose it, we really would be in trouble. So I want to see increasing confidence being shown, and that's one of the jobs of our all-party parliamentary group on faith and society, to help celebrate what Christians and people of other faiths are doing, and to make sure that they're not for example, faced with unhelpful, unsympathetic local councils, as is too often the case. But of course there are issues as well where we need to protect religious freedom. I really value the contribution, for example, of organisations like this one, Premier Radio, that I've been able to help from time to time when they were under pressure. And I'm sure there will be other instances where safeguards of that kind are required from us in Parliament. But on the whole, I think people who are believers should feel confident, because I sense a growing recognition around the country, including on the part of parliamentarians who've got no personal faith themselves, that if you look for where are the signs of hope in our society, it's very often churches are the places that you look.
That's excellent. It's really good. Stephen, now we do face a housing crisis in this country, particularly in London and the South East, particularly for first-time buyers wanting to get on the property market and fulfil their aspirations of owning their own home. What policies have the Labour Party to actually help first-time buyers achieve their dream of their home ownership?
Well, we've got to make major changes to the housing market. Last year, the number of new homes built in the UK was the smallest peacetime number, I think, since the 1920s. The market is broken after 7 years of Conservative-led governments, and we need to put that right. And part of what we have to do is to build a new generation of council and housing association homes. Many council homes have been sold, and one well understands the reasons that was done, and there's a lot to be said for, and I don't oppose the policy of selling council homes, but we then have to replace them, because there's a new generation now that needs places to live. In my constituency in East London, I'm constantly talking to people who are being forced to move out of London altogether. They can't get a home in London. Their family may be here, their friends may be here, their job may be here. They just cannot get something affordable where they can live. They're being forced miles and miles away. And the key, I think, the first step, well, two first steps. First of all, build more homes, get the market working properly. And secondly, and as part of that, invest in a new generation of council housing association homes, the numbers of which have dwindled so dramatically over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. I just want to go now on to issues relating to defence and security. Now this election is becoming more important when it comes down to defence of the realm, and particularly because of the statements that your leader Jeremy Corbyn has made about Trident and our nuclear deterrent. I see in your election manifesto, it does actually state that you support Trident, and
the manifesto is very clear on that.
Supports that one. But it also then talks about how, for example, there isn't much talk about NATO. And what is the Labour Party's position in supporting NATO, particularly against a resurgent Russia, who's putting many of the new democratic Eastern European nations who feel threatened by a resurgent Russia in their place, so that their freedoms and their democracy is guaranteed?
Well, our party's policy is very clear on this. As you say, the manifesto makes it clear we will renew Trident. We are strongly supportive of NATO. It was a Labour government that invented NATO after World War II, the Foreign Secretary Ernie Bevan, along with the Americans. We are very firmly committed to NATO. And I agree with you about the worry of resurgent Russian interference, not just in Eastern Europe, but from what we're starting to hear in elections in the United States, perhaps elsewhere in Europe as well. I think we need to be very vigilant about this. The threats are perhaps rather different in character from what they were in the past. We saw the cyber attack that affected the National Health Service and organisations all around the world in recent weeks. That's an area where we need to be very vigilant in the future, where our defence effort needs to be trained as well as in more conventional ways. But we cannot afford to let our guard slip, and I welcome the commitment to achieving defence spending at the internationally agreed target level that's again set out in our manifesto.
In recent years, Stephen, we've seen a huge increase in ISIS-inspired terrorist attacks, particularly from lone wolf terrorists in Europe, in France and in Belgium, and also in Germany as well. And in March we had our own Westminster terror attack as well. Shouldn't, for example, the big internet giants like Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, take more responsibility to stop the incitement of this hate-filled ideology that's poisoning so many minds and is actually encouraging so many young impressionable Muslims into a life of jihad and terrorism?
Well, you might remember that I was a victim myself of this kind of attack 7 years ago. And I was worried at that time about the role of the internet, and I think you're right to express concerns about this. I mean, the reality is it's not easy for the companies to take down things when they are identified to them, and often when they are taken down they immediately pop up, get posted up by somebody else. But I do think there is more that needs to be done about this in partnership between government and the internet companies, and I hope we are going to see more progress in the next few years than we have in the last few.
In recent years, we've also seen an alarming increase in the rise of anti-Semitism in Britain and Europe and around the world. And there is concerns within the Jewish community that many within the Jewish community have been very actively involved in the Labour Party, funding the Labour Party, being involved in the Labour Party, but now they're finding it very difficult to even vote Labour because of the perceived anti-Semitism in the party, and what they can see is Jeremy Corbyn's failure to really tackle this issue. What plans do you have and your party have of reassuring the Jewish community and confronting this rise of anti-Semitism?
Well, it certainly does need to be confronted. So that's why I'm so supportive of the work of the Jewish Labour movement, why I welcome the fact that Jeremy Newmark is our candidate in Finchley and Golders Green, representing the party, senior member of the Jewish Labour movement. That's what I think we should be seeing, Jewish people not walking away from the party, working in the party, when they come across problems, confronting them, identifying them, naming them, so that the rest of us can take action to deal with them.
And when it comes down to the issue of Israel, now Jeremy Corbyn couldn't even name the name Israel at a recent meeting of the Labour Friends of Israel. Isn't that very troubling, because Israel is the only one true democracy in the Middle East. It's the only nation in the Middle East that upholds liberal values such as a free press and a free assemblies, and democracy has all the institutions of democracy.
Well, I'm pleased to say Israel is named in the Labour Party manifesto. Our view set out in the manifesto is that the right future in the Middle East is a secure Israel alongside a secure independent Palestine, 2 states. And I hope we'll see some progress towards that. We've been very clear about it. I think there are grounds for criticising Israel. I'm deeply disappointed that illegal settlement building is carrying on. That should not be happening, and inevitably there will, and rightly, be criticism of Israel when that happens. I would like to see Israel complying with international law, and I think if that was to happen, then we'd be more likely to move towards a peaceful solution than seems to be on the cards just at the moment. It's hard now to see if this carries on that a 2-state solution could actually be viable, whether there is going to be enough land without being pockmarked by settlements for a viable Palestinian state to be formed. That's the worry, I think, about where current Israel government policy is leading us.
I just want, in terms of the Jewish settlements, for example, they would say that they are filling their biblical mandate to actually build in land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and this is the biblical spiritual heartland of the Jewish people. And the reason why there seems to be such an impasse in the peace process is because the Palestinian Authority don't want peace with Israel. They're preparing their children for war. They're inciting them with hatred and genocide in their media and in their education system. That's actually preventing a workable solution between the two because they refuse to recognise Israel as a Jewish state.
But Israel needs to comply with international law. All of us need to obey the law. Sometimes we feel that we shouldn't have to for one reason or another. We all do. Israel has to as well. It isn't doing at the moment. It's flagrantly breaching international law, and we're not going to get a peaceful settlement while that carries on.
In terms of Christians in the Middle East who are on the verge of being ethnically cleansed, facing genocide, what is your party doing to help protect this very ancient communities?
I think this is crucial, and we frequently have meetings about this in Parliament. A proposal in our manifesto that I very warmly welcome is that there should be a dedicated ambassador working directly to the Foreign Secretary whose role will be to promote religious freedom around the world. That's a proposal that was actually in our 2015 manifesto. It's in our manifesto again for this coming general election, and I hope finally that proposal is put into effect, because I think that would enable the UK to have a bigger role in fighting for the rights of Christians in the Middle East and other persecuted minorities elsewhere in the world as well.
And finally, Stephen, my last question to you. Why should our viewers vote Labour on Thursday, the 8th of June?
I think all of us can see we're running into really serious problems with the health service. There are deep, deep concerns about funding of education. I think Tory austerity has reached the end of the road. We need to be able to invest in our public services all of us depend on. Yes, that is going to require a bit more tax being paid by people earning more than 80,000, the best off 5% in the country. But I think that's a small price to pay for maintaining vital services which are crucial for all of us, and only a Labour government is going to get the resources that we need to maintain and I hope significantly improve health, education, the services that all of us count on.
Stephen, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy election schedule to come meet me today and to put the policies and views forward of the Labour Party.
Thank you for having me.